We're here for the procurement and pre-construction panel discussion. I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Greg Garvin, who is Vice President and Director of Global Purchasing at Gilbane Building Company. We have Allan Fiddes, Vice President of Estimating and Pre-Construction at Lee Kennedy Company, and Josh Bilotta, Director of Operations and Pre-Constructions at Walsh Brothers. Now I'm going to turn things over to our moderator, Mr. Joe Kelly of Mass Construction Consultants.
Great. Thanks, Warren. And thank you all for coming out. I'm very excited about this topic. And when we were doing our pre-call, it quickly became evident to Allan, Josh, and Greg that we needed to focus the conversation a little bit. So for today's purposes, we're going to make the assumption that the general contractor has been awarded the project. And that's the kind of process we're going through. If you do have questions about a more competitive bid for a GC and how that would go, please go ahead and ask that question. We're going to try and take questions during the panel if you have them. So go ahead and raise your hand and we'll take the questions. And then if from a time perspective, if it gets a little too long, I'll have to be the bad guy and cut you all off and say, we'll take them at the end. But we'll go ahead and get started. So you're determining early bid packages? Is it always kind of the same? And then what are maybe the edge cases where you might be bringing in a sub that might not typically be an early bid package?
Yeah, I can take that, Joe. So I kind of alluded to it earlier. It depends on the phase. It depends on the project, actually, the complexity. But there's really potentially four categories of bid packages when we'll bring subs on early. If it's a design assist or a design build, that's normally at the end of SD. You've got a basis of design. You'll move forward, with getting someone involved under contract at a design assist, design build stage. The next level would be like an early package. So if you think of the first phase would basically be like your facade. Contractors, that's the biggest one, and then the second stage would be the early packages. That's really schedule based. If you have a schedule, if it's steel, if it's mechanical equipment that you need to bring people on early, that's when you'll do that for that part. The third is for coordination. If we feel like the project and pre-construction would benefit from the coordination support from the subcontractors, we will lobby early to get somebody involved well before the job starts, just to support us in that coordination process.
Any thoughts, Doug?
We look at it exactly the same way. We generally let the schedule tell us what we need so we can justify that, because we're a partner with our client. We need to justify that. I think sometimes they get nervous about bringing people in on the coordination, but if you can be creative with the contract and sign it where there's an out. I mean, obviously the project would take a hit if you switch contractors from a schedule standpoint, but they're not completely locked in, so the sub's going to stay competitive. And I think we found, a lot of the subcontractors we work with at the institution's just as important to them as we are. They do work directly for the institution, so I think that they can trust those partners and know that they're going to be fair, because there's a lot more at stake than just that one job. But it can be difficult to get everybody on the owner's side to feel comfortable.
Agree to that.
Yeah.
You think the same, Greg? Schedule is really the heavy driver?
Yeah, schedule is a heavy driver. It really depends, again, dictated by the project. What are the project requirements? Sometimes we're buying for lead times to comply with schedule. Sometimes we're buying for design assistance. That could be technical design assistance, like actually stamping or having a design opinion. It could be budget feedback in accordance with design, right? Again, to sort of my earlier point, making sure that design is progressing to budget. So we might sign up a contractor earlier in that process. We might also be buying for capacity. That's something we're doing more and more on our mega projects outside of New England specifically, but the data center, semiconductor, pharma space, the trade partners who operate in that space are booked out years out. So we're not doing anything with them right away, but we're buying up their future labor capacity. So that's something that also we bring people on board early for.
Is that a formal agreement that you're?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
And they've been open?
Yeah.
Presumably?
They're happy. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then what happens if that project doesn't go? You end up not needing that demand.
Yeah, there's contractual backstops, as you would imagine, if projects disappear or delay significantly. But
Oh, interesting. Right, so you mentioned design assist. So design assist, you guys were giving me a little education before. Design assist versus delegated design. How are you choosing those partners to bring on? We're not okay. It's not just an early bid package, but we need you to be part of our planning.
Yeah, I think it's become very strategic. It isn't always schedule. I mean, I think the industry understands the value of bringing, the boots on the ground into the process early. Obviously, there's a risk. From a client's perspective, there's risk there because the drawings aren't complete. There's always the risk that things will once you have someone on board, do you get that competitive edge? So there's a balance, and we manage that. As far as I mentioned the three phases. It really the subs that are involved early, the various early says normally the facade subcontractors. Those are the ones who are, in my experience, normally in first. Mechanical equipment has become huge. It's getting a little better, and electrical. That's another one that we bring in, not necessarily on a design assist. That's more procurement based. And those are the big two we bring in early. But then you're getting into your site work, your concrete, your steel. That's for scheduling purposes. And then the other item. So that's to meet the schedule that you have. You understand your lead items. Then there's a third phase of if you're trying to expedite the schedule. That's when you might bring complementary subs on board like MEPs, if not necessarily on a design assist, but it could be just to support the coordination, elevator, things like that. You're going to need early specialty equipment. You're going to need, early coordination. Those are the three levels that I see.
I think to what Allan said, I mean, the facade's definitely, for us, the biggest driver as far as if you're going to switch from either a prefab facade or conventional facade, it's a big impact for the structure and all the details. So that's got to be decided really early, whether you're going to be pulling the slab edges in or pushing them out, and how's the building loaded. Real important to get that.
I would say ditto to everything that was said. I think the only thing maybe that could be of value is just to spend some time on clarifying what are these things. Does you hear design build, design assist, delegated design, early bid packages? These are all different things that sometimes get confused. So maybe it's helpful, right? So design build is when, if we engage you all in design build, that's when, your stamp is on the line. You are literally designing, significant or all portions of your scope of work. And maybe you literally have design staff or you're partnering with an engineer of some kind, but you're responsible for the stamp. I would say a subset of that is delegated design, where you're responsible for a portion of your scope. And you see that sometimes in MEP, where the engineer of record is designing and stamping the trunk lines, but you're doing all of the branch lines and you're putting your stamp on it. Or the structural engineer is designing the structure, and a stair guy is designing the subset of the stairs. So that would be sort of delegated design. And design assist could be a mix of that, but really what we're doing is we're bringing in your advice and opinion on the engineer of record's design as it relates to constructability, as it relates to schedule, as it relates, most importantly, probably to budget. So you're not stamping anything. You're not responsible for the design, but you have a significant opinion on the success of the design, and that's why we want your resources early in the process. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. I'm going to go a little off script and maybe speak for some folks in the room. I have spoken with subcontractors that are not the usual suspects when it comes to early bid package, design assist, early coordination, whatever you want to call it, that feel like they should be in earlier. Mm-hmm. And they say, they always take the mechanical trades, the envelope and steel guy or whatever, but it would work better if we were in early as part of that conversation. But why aren't more of the trade partners brought in early? Or is it more of a case by case? And what's the thoughts?
I could take a stab at it, and I'd love to hear your guys' opinion. I think our clients certainly have the perspective that if I don't have, a significantly developed design and I'm having my GC make awards to trade partners, I'm at risk. right? Because there could be change orders, right? Clients are worried about the cost implication of the lack of detailed design. And so they think like we're signing you up early if we want to do that on a lump sum basis. And if the design changes, then the client's paying for it. And that's not how we go to market with design assist, delegated design, certainly not design build trade partners. And so it's a little bit of an education for us, like educating our clients how we're going to market when we need those early trade partners. There still is a competitive analysis. It's done on much different terms. It's not just a number. And maybe we can get into that a little bit more later. But it's sort of a client education. And some clients are, receptive and comfortable, and some clients are not. And that's okay.
It was interesting, actually. We just finished a 3-year, we're finishing in a couple months, IPD at Boston Medical Center. And that happened to be a contract where the risk was shared. They were willing to do that. Now, we bought it in a time where the market was still really busy and a lot of people were hesitant to get involved. But we did have, Sweeney Drywall was involved, and they had obviously drywall, they had the fire stopping scope, they had the ceiling scope. So some trades that you typically wouldn't see involved. And it was very beneficial. But again, to his point, you got to prove the value to the owner, and I think in an IPD it did because it put more people in the pot of risk. So
So there's less downside for the owner, right? Because they feel more protected.
oh yeah, I mean they were motivated to do a good job because the more money they gave back, the more shared savings. So it was very successful, but there was only a couple extra trades that you wouldn't normally see.
Yeah, and the other point here is the contract, right? We're contractually tied to get competitive numbers on every trade. So part of our award has to include a competitive part to that. So the earlier you are, the harder that is. And that's where it's harder to justify to our owner. I have lots of thoughts on this, but the other thing is design doesn't get complete often. I would say 50% of the jobs I work on right now, the finishes are not complete by the time we've started the job. So it's very hard to bring trades in that kind of interiors portion on board when you haven't got a design. So that's kind of the other thing. And I think as construction managers, we're getting, with all the resources we have, we're getting ahead of the complexity of some of the projects. I'll give you an example of an early package I did. Masonry typically isn't an early package job, but a project we just completed at MIT had brick from Spain called Rojo brick that they only fire the kiln once a year. So we had to get the mason on early for that one. So there's kind of oddballs as well.
Yeah.
Can you expand a little bit on why that is? Why do you think that is? That designs are kind of like lagging in the construction? It's not in construction, we're still waiting for designs.
We all like to blame the design team, but often it's actually one step above them. There's a lot of committees that make decisions in a building projects and kind of herding the cats to get, those are the biggest decisions, or what's the finishes going to look like.
So you really, it's going to be client or design, and it's not a GC driven. You everybody here would presumably want everybody on as early as possible. Is that fair? I mean, Josh says it worked, right? With the obviously it's
It worked because
IPD
they had risk.
Yes, yeah, they had stake in the game. So anybody else seeing? I know BMC is historically a big fan of IPD. Anybody else doing IPD?
Brown does. Brown
as well.
University.
Yeah.
Outside of New England, it's more popular.
I'm seeing more design build than IPD right now. Because that was a buzzword, 5-10 years ago. And design build is a different animal. A true design build contract is I'm seeing it more and more, and that is when the CM becomes the owner very early, and it's up to us whether we want to bring on subs at that point. We've committed to the number, we've committed to the design, we've got to get there. So that kind of takes that decision out of the owner at that point.
Okay. So we're talking a lot about this front end, bringing subs on early, trade partners on early. I guess I want to ask this two ways. How are they contributing from a value engineering standpoint? And maybe, what would you like to see out of trade partners from a value engineering standpoint?
I'll speak from my
please.
perspective of a institutional job. Again, obviously it depends on the job, but let's say it's a heavy mechanical or infrastructure type of job, you really need those partners early to make sure that you're putting together a design that will work for the building and that you can keep the building running. You know, if you just go through and design and then find out you can't, you either can't get there or the cutovers aren't going to work or the shutdowns aren't going to work, that would be a good reason they would add value. And then actually are we into the question we were talking about value engineering?
Value engineering, yeah.
Yeah. A lot of times with our jobs, the schedule and logistics are driving the cost of the job. It's not what's just on the drawing. So you got to bring someone in. The trade partners might have a better idea, a more efficient way of doing it. That's going to actually say cut out shutdowns, be less disruptive to the hospital, shorten the project. So I think bringing them in, not just looking at the drawings and trying to do less of something or something cheaper, but trying to find a better way to do the job. And that might even work with, say, an addition as far as doing panelized on something that normally wouldn't fit into panelized, but it reduces so much risk and shortens the job so much that it is worth it.
Yeah, if I may interrupt here, I got the feeling that universally, everybody on this panel felt like you wanted more from trade partners when it comes to value engineering. You would like more involvement from them? Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah,
Across the board?
I would say yes. I think with some caveats, when it comes to communication, which
Yeah, don't call me 17 times a day. I get
we
that,
have,
but
later. But yeah, I mean we talked a lot about design assist. The whole point of design assist is so that we can do value engineering as the design develops, not after the design is developed, right? So that when you do value engineering after the design is developed, you start getting into sort of adversarial relationships, right? You're cutting maybe sacred cows, or you're making some suggestions that the designer, the owner, does not want to accept. So the whole point of design assist is to get your opinion on cost as the design is developing. We're sort of doing real-time value engineering. So that's the gold standard. Again, if we can convince our clients that is an approach worth taking, that's what we love to do. Regardless of if we're not taking a design assist approach, if we're doing more traditional approach, we love to get budget feedback from you all. Maybe a little too much. There might be some in the room that we go to too much, but the whole point in doing that is, again, real-time budget feedback, the actual cost of the work, getting a second set of eyes on the design. What can we do differently to pull this budget in, this design into budget before we have fully developed design? So that's kind of the whole point. And then Josh, you mentioned it. Everybody thinks the value in the value engineering is cost value, but there is schedule value, there's logistical value, there's labor certainty value, and so especially in some of the larger projects that I referenced earlier, the value that we're trying to engineer into the job is certainty that's other than cost, right? Are we going to be able to execute this project on time? Are we going to have the labor to build a job? And if we don't have the labor to build a job, is there a different way to build a job? And you're seeing a lot more OSM, modular, multi-trade, offsite manufacturing work in that space. I would consider that value engineering. You're not cutting the cost of the job, but you're increasing the certainty of the execution of the job itself. So.
And I think from an expertise perspective, strategically, what's the hook to bring subcontractors on early? I think you alluded to it. We all want to bring subcontractors on early. We all see the benefit of it. What's the hook? How do we do that? And one of the strategies we've had is to build in value engineering with that an award at an early stage. So that's the hook for the owner. Listen, here's your numbers. We're actually on budget, but we can get more than that. We can do better than that, whether that's schedule, whether that's cost, constructability. This is a really good deal as well as a good thing for the project, so that can work.
I have actually a good example. They're sitting right here in the second row, but over at that IPD project, they weren't an IPD partner, but Salem Glass, we were able to convince the owner to bring them in early. It was a vertical addition over Mass Ave, and we had started out by ruling out unitized curtain wall because the quantity was small and the logistics. Then when we ended up using a tower crane, and we had a hoist, and we started looking at it, Salem decided, I think we'll unitize this in-house so we don't have to worry about the quantity. And they worked through some complicated, it was interesting to keep the amount of structural reinforcing, and actually we brought in the structural guy early as a partner. We had really long spans. Well, what the problem was that with these really long spans, you had very atypical deflection in the middle. Camber. And we had the fact that, so they had to come up with a system how they could install this unitized curtain wall and bring the beam down slowly and make adjustments. So, it was an integral part of the team, and it ended up with a very unique movement joint at the bottom. So having a partner on board early
Yeah. And that sounds like that was not even a cost-driven.
ended up saving us a lot of money, actually.
Oh, so it was
Schedule.
both.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
months on the tower crane and quicker to weather tight. So the owner, that's the other value. A lot of these healthcare jobs is if they can get patients in the rooms earlier, right? It doesn't matter if the cost of project money, it's so expensive. They make so much money off a patient bed if you can get them in earlier, and that's what we were able to do.
So we should get our minds out of value engineering being a cost reduction. If you go with a Mitsubishi versus some other model, you can save $20 a unit or whatever. It's more how can you just bring value to this, whether it's surety, like sureness of product, time, money. You guys are looking for all that. I'm curious to the room, maybe just a hands would, as trade partners, are you interested in providing more on the value engineering side, or would you like to be driven from the GC? Most people are nodding yes.
I'd say we're JEC, we're a mechanical contractor.
Mm-hmm.
Very much interested in being upfront because one of the challenges we have, we make ductwork, we prefab pipe. One of the challenges we have is that we're always chasing the scale, always. And ductwork, similar to millwork, is made from raw materials. You don't buy it off of the shelf. Very, very custom, heavy into coordination and bin and downloading. And what oftentimes happens is we say, if you were in earlier or the engineering just doesn't work. And through no fault of the engineer, maybe when we speak to the engineers, we'll hear back things like, well, we wanted 16 weeks and 12 site visits, and we got 7 and 3 visits. So we're left into this change order abyss that none of us ultimately, I think there's a misconception in the market, maybe from the ownership side, that change orders are a good thing. They're not. They're at least from our perspective, they're a disturbance. It becomes, as much as we try not to have it be adversarial or combative, it becomes a situation where the impression is that the change order is just a way to recoup dollars. And from our perspective, it's not. It's very much we would like the best jobs we have are ones that have minimal change orders. So somehow if we could get that message forward and say, can we be involved early, maybe we can avoid some of these pitfalls.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think there's a gap there. Both sides, I think, want more involvement, so that maybe there's a place where that can even improve moving forward. And this is kind of almost a little bit of a step backwards, but pre-qualifications. There's been a lot of talk even lately on a lot of the stuff I do, or even safety being involved with pre-qualifications. And what's going into, all three of you, what's going into your determination of, who meets the qualifications to be on the project?
Sure.
And is one project different than the other even?
Sure. Yeah, everybody's favorite topic, I'm sure, in this room. So, I would consider pre-qualification 2 different things. Capital P, pre-qualification, and then I would call it like bid pre-qualification, and I'll sort of unpack those, right? So capital P, pre-qualification is, are you suited to do business for one of the GCs here? And excuse me, and oftentimes you're going to see that on a platform. So Lee Kennedy and Gilbane use Compass. Hopefully there's not too many groans in the room, but that's sort of the basic barrier to entry. We need you to upload your business information, insurance, safety information, project portfolios, finances, so on and so forth, so we can understand the health of your company, so that we can do the lowercase p pre-qualification, which is, now we have a job, we have a bid package that's worth X, we're looking to select bidders to invite for bid, and there's sort of a second tier of pre-qualification that happens, right? You've gone through the first door, you get a score in our system, now we have a project, we need to consider other things just than the on-paper data metrics, right? Like, what is your capacity? What is your experience with this client or of a project of this size? What is your financial capacity at the time? How much of that is wrapped in other projects? What is our cultural fit and past relationship like? All of those considerations go into before we even ask you to bid, right? So, if you're getting a bid invite, you can rest assured that those questions have been answered on our side of the fence, and we want you to participate, right? And that will get us to a later point, like if you don't then participate, like as much proactive feedback from you as possible would be great, because we've already limited our bid list before we send it out to you, and we're kind of relying on your response. So that's my perspective.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add. On the front end part, I'm not really involved. Our estimating department has somebody that handles the first part of that. On the back end of that, we obviously are more of a local contractor, so we work a lot with the same people. I'd say our operations teams definitely give input to estimating on the teams they think are more suited to be on the certain campuses, but I'm not totally involved in that.
You can go a
Sorry.
little closer to Mike. Yeah.
Second time I was spoken to.
Yeah. And any ruler. Yeah. Alan?
Yeah, just, echoing what the guys said, we will not invite you to one of our negotiated projects if you don't have a legitimate shot. Our partnerships are huge to us. It's one of the biggest dilemmas of a construction manager is to keep everyone happy. Because, we understand, we don't give you work, you're going to stop bidding. So that's a balance that we all play. And it's one of the biggest roles that I play in purchasing is making sure we're fair, making sure we're honest in our process, and making sure everyone has the same shot. And it's not always cost. You're right with that. It's a lot of it is the fit. A lot of it is, we get back to value engineering. Who's coming up with some ideas to make this project more time or cost effective? That can really help in an award. So dig in. Get involved. If you're in, be all in. That's what I say to you.
The only thing I would add, Joe, and just to give you a bit of a plug, your Construction Safety Perspectives podcast episode, the most latest one, where they were talking about, safety and pre-qualification. And I would say, by and large, there is a trend that's sort of on the verge of a tipping point. Like we're no longer relying on EMR as sort of our sole threshold for safety. And you're going to see that a lot more. I think you're already seeing it from some of the CMs that were represented on that panel. But we're working with Compass specifically, and we're working internally to look at other factors, EMR being one of them, but not the sole threshold. EMR is a lagging indicator. It really tells us, how your workers' comp claims have been, and that's really it. It doesn't really tell us what your safety culture or record is like. So we're looking at other metrics like, do you have full-time safety staff within your organization, or do you contract that out? How robust is your safety plan? What sort of serious injuries or fatalities, SIFs, have you had on your record? What's your TRIR? There's more of a holistic approach that you're going to start to see in the industry, which I think is for the better because, again, EMR is looking backwards. You could have a high EMR and be a really safe contractor. You could have a low EMR and be a very unsafe contractor. And so there's a sort of an awakening that's happening on the larger CM side. So hopefully that's a good thing.
I didn't hear anyone mention anything about the financial stability of the firms. Where's that play in, or is that kind of with the trade partner base you have, there's not a concern? Does it get looked at, or
absolutely
is it?
Gets looked at. Yep, it absolutely gets looked at, especially, the CMs either in the room or out there that have, internal STI programs and don't rely so much on bonds. We have a very vested interest in your financial health. And so we ask for a lot of information, probably much to your chagrin, with respect to your finances, but that's for a reason. And we, apply a score internally on what your single project limit might be and what your aggregate limit might be. And then we track metrics on how much backlog you have with us. And we apply a certain assumption about what that might mean about your backlog with other CMs. And that's all considered when we go to that small P pre-qualification that I talked about. Like, okay, now we have a real job. Who do we invite? What do we know about their capacity and their backlog with us and with other CMs at the moment? So safety and finances are the first and second leg of that process.
And pardon my ignorance on this question. Maybe everybody in the room already knows it, but has anybody on this panel, refused the pre-qualification or not allowed somebody for financial reasons within the last
100%.
few?
Yep, 100%.
Okay, so it's a real issue.
100%.
Yeah, and I think financials are only good. They're 12 months old by the time you read them. A lot of the evaluation is financial, but a lot of it is anecdotal. It's not just based on what the numbers say. It's what people are hearing. It's what people are seeing. It's about partnerships. So that plays into it.
Yeah, it's the rumor mill often ends up being pretty accurate. You know, when you hear of companies struggling and then not too far down the road, and you're like, oh, yep, there it goes. I won't name any names, but you see it.
We still require bonds, and we had a contractor that we were working with on a long design assist, and when it came time to sign the contract, they couldn't meet the bond requirement anymore, and we had to switch, which was a big deal.
And that's not just they have too much work going on. It's financial. Right. When it comes to bid evaluation, bid leveling, you know, what are the considerations or factors, however you want to word it, when it comes to trying to get everybody apples to apples?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Those are the words I was going to use. So,
Sorry, Greg.
Nope, that's all right. We take that process very seriously and methodically. And again, maybe to the chagrin of some of the people in the room, I know we get feedback like, hey, we just submitted our bid. Where do we stand? What's going on? Who's got the job already? You're making assumptions. You're very excited about it. But we are extremely methodical in evaluating our bids, right? And just simply from a cost perspective, our first priority is to make sure that the bids truly are apples to apples, right? If we're assuming here for the sake of the conversation, we're operating at CM at risk with a GMP, we owe our clients a guaranteed maximum price. That means we want to sign up a trade contractor that has everything we need to execute the job. So we get initial bids. The first question we're asking ourselves, like, what are the bid spreads? Not like who's low and is that going to be the contractor we're going with? It's like, are the bid spreads more than 10%? Because if they're more than 10%, like that throws up the big flag. Like they really shouldn't be more than 10% if everybody's got everything the job needs, right? Certainly not more than 20%. So when we start to see spreads, we say, okay, we dig in a little bit more, and those in the room who have bid to Gilbane in the past, very hefty bid form with breakouts, and we're asking for those breakouts for a reason, because we're looking for, in the case of an excess of 10%, where is that 10%? Is it in the ductwork? Is it in the equipment? Is it in the labor? Because again, our interest is in making sure that we're going to sign somebody up for the right cost that is all encompassing of our scope. And, we have a very thorough, what we call scope review process or bid debriefs, whatever the case may be in the market. And we're asking very tough questions. And oftentimes I get feedback like, hey, you're asking me questions. You're having me include stuff in my price that's going to inflate my price. What are you doing? Are you trying to make me number two? Like, there must be somebody out there that you really want to get the job because you keep inflating my price. Like, no, I'm inflating your price because your price, initial one, doesn't have the things that we need in it to execute the job, right? So rest assured when we're doing that, like we are trying to level the bids and ensure that they're inclusive of the things that we need to do to execute the job. So that's just price, right? And price is really only one aspect of bid evaluation. Then we get into all other things like safety, schedule, labor, manpower. Do you have a foreman picked for this job yet? If not, that makes us a little bit nervous. We like to know what kind of foremen are going to be on our jobs and if we have experience with them or not. You get into projects that might have minority or small business requirements. What do you bring into the table there to help meet our requirements for the client? And then you get into sort of more intangibles, like what has the history been between our two firms? What do we know about your backlog with other contractors? So it's more than just a number. And when it is the number, back to my original point, like we're asking questions for a reason. Our interest is in making sure we're signing up the contractor that has the right number that includes all of the scope for the job.
Yeah, yeah. I think the biggest thing that we see again on the institutional work is people who, am I leaning in enough now?
Yeah.
People who
Perfect.
are understanding how we're planning to build a job. And we came up with that plan with some contractor input because we know that plan works and it's best for the project. So making sure that people are reading our ITBs and understand the phasing, the shutdown requirements, schedule, is it off hours, make sure that's in there. Otherwise, it's a lot of the same process that Greg just.
Yeah. So you're looking for the atypical stuff
What's not
that
in the
is
drawing-
in
what's
that
not in the drawings and
project,
specs.
making sure you're capturing those.
Yes. That's where we see the biggest. People look at it, well, I was just going to come in and do it in one phase during the day. Well, it's 3 phases and it's off hours. So
Yeah, and it's in an OR. Yeah, yeah.
And that's the other point that kind of I'd like to make. The nuances are we're doing all this work so we can put in a GMP. When we put in a GMP, we're the only ones at risk. right? We haven't signed anybody up for those numbers. So it's incumbent on us to make sure everything is covered when we put in our GMP. So the back and forth, the scope reviews, I think all three of our firms put really detailed scope reviews together. We want to talk with you. We want to have a conversation, whether that's in person, whether that's on the phone. But that has to happen in advance of our GMP. So the dates are really, really important to us. You know, when we give you a date for a bid, it's normally hopefully a week in advance of when our GMP is, so we can have those conversations. So the dates are not normally for us a maybe. You know, they're really, really important. And from our perspective, you know, going back to what you said, we've got a selected list of subcontractors. We've already called the field. If there's something stopping you giving us the bid on that day, have a conversation with us beforehand. Don't just give us a call day of and say, I'm going to need another week, because that normally doesn't help us, and it doesn't make you look good, and it doesn't make us look good.
Can I ask a question about that?
Please, you.
A lot of times, we're waiting on a sub of ours to get some pricing.
Mm-hmm.
So is it better, I always try to call, unfortunately, it's usually last day that they give us our subs, give us our pricing. Is it better that I give you partial pricing and plugs for what I'm missing, with best assumptions, or is it, I mean, I've been doing that lately on the plumbing side.
So I
question.
turn that on back on you.
Yeah.
To say you've got to make those dates as important to your vendors as we're making the dates that are important to us.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times that doesn't happen, and the vendors, I mean, they pick the latest date that any sub tells them. That's just what they do, you know, and that gets around. So, but to answer your question directly, it depends. I think a conversation is what we need to have. I think you need to have that dialogue. So we need to know where you are. You've got everything in, but your duck number, and you know, maybe we can help you out with that. You know, maybe we can call some of the vendors and, you know, speed things up a little. So we can support you if lighting is another one. If there's any electrical subs in here, lighting is the biggest challenge of all. Getting pricing. They're always last minute, and they're never complete. So that is the earlier we can get ahead of that, the more conversations we can have. Don't stick your head in the ground. Call us. You know, we can help.
This might even be for the room as well as the panel. Are people seeing better responsiveness now that it's not as busy as we've been over the past 6-10 years?
We're getting more phone calls, and anyway. But yes, absolutely. The market is important. So, you know, we are seeing a market that's down on commercial, down on academic. Some of the other sectors are picking that up. But yeah, it's easier now. But you know something? That makes, because people are being so aggressive with their numbers, that's when we need the time to scope people out. We're not afraid to tell people, you know, you go back and look at your ductwork number. There might be, you know, we all ask for breakouts. No one wins when somebody misses something, because it just is pain and trouble for everyone.
Mm-hmm. How do you deal with the delicate, this is kind of maybe the pre-qual, I guess it's involved with all this, but how do you deal with the delicate nature of, you know, trade partner B has been helping with a lot of the questions or working on some stuff, and then it comes to bid evaluation. Does that subcontractor's time that they spent on the front end play into that evaluation?
Yeah, I would say yes. I mean, hopefully it's advantageous to you if you have an earlier look at the job and you can pull together a tighter bid. You know, it helps. It doesn't help us if you remain silent, I guess I would say, right? Like, so if you're involved in the budgeting process, the hope is you know more about the job than your competition when it comes time to bid. But if you're not asking the questions that, you know, relate to the foreknowledge that you have on the job, those questions aren't being answered to your competition. They don't have the same level of awareness that you do. So again, it goes back to our responsibility, making sure that the bids are apples to apples, that everybody has the same amount of knowledge. So if you've been involved early and you're seeing something in the bid documents that doesn't sound right or doesn't relate to previous conversations you've had, you know, we ask that you raise your hand.
And I think it's a big red flag as well when the people who've been helping you from the beginning are high. Because
Exactly.
Because they know the job. So a lot of the times I'll have the conversation, why are you high? You know, what are you seeing that everyone else is not seeing? So we can have that conversation to make sure that we're being fair, we're being, you know, honest to everybody, and making sure that if there's a ceiling detail that no one's going to pick up, or, you know, a coordination issue, let's bring that up in advance of us giving a GMP so we can solve it and have all the bids level.
Yeah, and that helps the person that has done that front end work, 'cause rather than being high and losing out, you're bringing everybody else up to that same.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I know we're talking about projects we already have as a CM, but we get put in that same position sometimes where it's a really complicated logistical job and a client will ask us to do the pre-con, but tell us we're going to have to bid this out at the end because of wherever the funding is coming from or whatever, but it can be difficult. And then when you go after that in a competition, you ask as many questions you can, just like we're asking of the subcontractors, to make sure we can level the playing field on that, because you know too much.
Yeah, that's why I asked, because it seems like it would be a sensitive interaction,
It is. Yep.
right? Especially someone's invested all that time and then it's going to someone else.
Yep.
This is probably my favorite question in here, and I think we've kind of brought this up in a number of answers along the way, but what roles are the subcontractors playing, or do you want them to be playing when it comes to the planning, scheduling, logistics? Actually, how do we build this building?
So we all have our in-house planning departments, our schedulers, our field ops do the majority of our logistics plans, but frankly, they're not building the project. So that input and feedback from the people who are building the project is massive, whether that's schedule durations, whether that's lead items, you know, whether that's logistics, how you're going to stage the project, what are the options for staging. Those really need to be solved and have an approach early in the process. And frankly, normally we don't have subs on board at that stage, so that's where our partnerships come in play. That's why we do have a selective bid list of, you know, 4 or 5 subs in each trade. It's not 10 or 15, because we know we're going to have to ask you for, frankly, some free work to help the process. If we can't bring you on in a design assist, if we can't bring you on in an early package, you're working at risk. So, but that feedback is so important to the whole project, and we really couldn't do it without that support, frankly.
I think Josh, this is really kind of in your wheelhouse, so I'd be curious
so
what you...
to keep consistency, you know, generally during a bidding process, the estimating department takes the lead as far as communication. So generally what I ask our operations teams, whether it be myself or somebody on a team, is to get with the estimating department, talk who's helping them. You know, if there's a couple subcontractors that are helping them, who are they? And then starting right at SD through DD, at every deliverable, we're, you know, issuing out logistics plans, we're issuing out a schedule, and we're getting feedback. We're having, you know, a teams meeting to review those certain things. Maybe, you know, steel, it could be facade, it could be MEPs, looking at durations and getting their feedback and kind of averaging out that feedback and making the best decisions right through every iteration of the project.
So you're getting it early enough that if a subcontractor comes back and says, you know what, one-man material hoist is not going to be sufficient because we're going to need 10 hours a day loading panels, like this doesn't work, you're early enough that you can make a substantial change like that?
Yeah, and the big issues we run into is some of the owners need to have cost consultants, and they look at costs differently. Some owners will tell their cost consultant, no, you take their GCs and GRs and logistics and put that in your number, and you're just looking at the trade, you know, numbers. So it's important. We spend a lot of time at our SD level. Logistics and schedule might be as good as somebody else's, you know, final. But we spend the time, because it's almost a qualification as you're going in. When you're handing an SD estimate, schedule, logistics, qualifications, it's a whole package is how we're building. It's not, you have drawings, your specs, and that completes the package on a lot of these projects. So that way, when a schedule consultant says, you know, it was an OR job we were looking at, occupied OR job, and well, you've got too much money here for, well, you know, for MEP piping and ductwork, and you know, to sit down and explain how that actually has to happen in an occupied area, and it's going to cost 3 times more than So you got to have that context to defend your number, really.
But I also think with the cost estimate, I was a cost estimator in a previous life, so I've been on the other side of that. They're bringing knives to gunfights because we've got you. They come up with this is what it should cost. We go, no, this is what we think, and actually we've got 2 or 3 subs that agree with us. Which way do you want to go at that point? So that's where I think it's really powerful.
And this is what the market's actually saying.
Yeah, you guys nailed it. I wouldn't add too much. The only thing I would say, it's never too late. If we are actually in the go-to-market phase and we're issuing you a site logistics plan that says this is how we want to build a job, or a schedule that says this is how we want to build a job, we welcome your feedback. Like if we're not making sense, if we're erecting from within the building versus outside the building, or working from the east facade clockwise, like that doesn't make sense. We want to hear it. There very, very well may be reasons why we think that's the way the job needs to be built. But again, you all are going to be the ones that we're signing up to build actually execute the job. So there's no time that's too late to give us that feedback.
I'll give one example on that one, though. Actually, it was a job 6 or 7 years ago, and we were interviewing for design assistant facade. And the night before, one of the contractors called me up with actually a really great idea. But we had just planned the whole job with the owner and staging and train, involvement and everything. And they were going to go in the next morning when someone was going to turn our whole year of planning upside down. And we just had to uninvite them to the thing. And in the end, maybe it would have been the right thing, but it was going to be too disruptive with the owner and the process and the schedule. But if they had just told us even a week before,
Interesting.
we could have really had some
Probably
meetings.
engage it,
Maybe it was the right decision, but it was just the night before it was too.
Too late.
I actually have a really funny story that doesn't involve anybody in this room, so I don't mind saying it. There was a precast subcontractor friend I had who was on a very big project with the CM who's not here. And he would sit in a weekly meeting, and the CM was showboating a little bit. He'd have a massive schedule around the whole conference room. So the precast guy was only part of the process. So when he was waiting to go through all the building parts, he would look at the schedule. And after the 3rd or 4th week, he had to bring the CM on board and said, this is not how you build a precast garage. You're building it floor by floor by floor. You build it in sections all the way up. So you're showing all this great schedule, but you can't build it that way.
Yep. So the message is early.
Early.
Yeah. In talking with the three of you, one of the things that came to mind was this seems like a lot, and it's usually probably short time windows. How do you manage the communication? Do you need to have one person on the GC side and one person on the trade partner side, and that's your expectation, or that's what you want? I only could imagine when all this documentation and questions are going back and forth, if it's 2 different PMs or a PM and an owner from a subcontractor, one of them is calling you. Well, I just spoke to Ted last week, and now Sarah's calling me and saying this. Like, I could imagine it would be a tremendous communication nightmare. What's the expectation? Do you want sole point of contacts? How would we like to see communication?
So I think you got to look at the big picture process, right? It's not just a bid, right? There's the bid, there's the purchase, you've got to build it. So we understand there's multiple players in that role, and each one has a lead. Our estimating group will talk to the estimators from whatever the sub is. That's a coordination. It's good to have that one-on-one coordination together. The logistics people are normally field people from both sides, so we don't want to have to go through a middleman for them to talk. So we let them communicate, but then filter everything through the estimator. And then when it comes from purchasing, it's always good to know who the decision makers are. And that's not always the estimator who's bidding the project. So from a purchasing perspective, that's when I typically get involved, and I'm not normally talking to the person who's put the bid in. So these kind of different roles for different parts of the job. But the clear thing is we need to know who's estimating it, who the decision maker is, and who's coming up with your logistics. And as long as both sides are clear on that, I think we're fine.
And there's not an issue where logistically something gets worked out and it doesn't get communicated to estimating?
There's always that risk. But I think the more communication you have, the more you don't want people not to communicate because they think there's a protocol.
So we have talking, same thing. We'll get together with the lead estimator on the job, who you're talking to, and we'll have those conversations freely. But we're very clear that if it doesn't come from estimating, then it doesn't exist. So when we have deliverables, like if it's coming up on an SD or DD, we're giving those logistics and schedules to estimating, and they're issuing them out. So if it didn't come from them, it didn't exist. And we're very clear, like, if a sub has a great idea, it's a great idea. I'm going to mention it, but you need to bid what you're given from estimating, because that's how things are going to be leveled,
So you do have a bit of a funnel. That's that.
We do. And a little different, I think. A lot of times, though, on negotiated work, the lead is with the owner is the operations person. Now, the estimating is there, too. It's just the lead with the owner's operations, the lead with the subcontractor is estimating. That's how we generally do it.
Yeah, I would say, the whole reason Gilbane has a separate purchasing staff and we don't buy with our estimators or we don't buy with our PMs is because we need to control the communication flow. Like for us, that's so important. I mean, when you're building your GMP and when you're signing up trade contractors, like that's where you're defining your risk threshold, right? And if I bid it this way, or I assumed we were going to do it that way because I talked to Johnny or Super and he said that was fine. Well, going back to what I said before, our first motive is apples to apples pricing, right? If we want to make a decision when we know that there's apples to apples pricing, and if you made an assumption because you talked to Johnny the Super, now we're not in an apples to apples situation, right? So the whole reason why Gilbane has a centralized purchasing department is to control that communication flow. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't other stakeholders. There absolutely are other stakeholders, but there needs to be a purchasing person, sort of quarterbacking those conversations. And we do have the side conversations, like let's have a huddle on site logistics with our field people and figure out, what the best way to build this is. But when it goes back to the market, it needs to, go out through purchasing. And when your questions come in to us, it needs to go through purchasing, because I can't ensure that everybody has the knowledge on the job if you're asking 5 different people on my side of the house, right? So a little bit different perspective, I would say.
Yeah. Is everybody on the panel okay with multiple, from the trade partner side, methods of communication or people communicating, or would you rather have a lead?
Yeah, I would say yes. So we use Procore bidding, right? And anybody who's a user on your side of the fence can submit RFIs as an example. Fine with me as long as all your RFIs are coming through on Procore. Again, if you're calling Johnny the Super or you're sending an email to the PM on the job, I don't know that question exists. Maybe I don't, right? And that means I can't ensure that all the bidders know the answer to that question, right? So multiple incoming is fine as long as it's incoming to the same funnel, right?
This one I'm going to ask the panel to be maybe somewhat critical. And where are you seeing issues with bids and bidders? Lack of technology, lack of detail, lack of prefabrication. Where are the places where you would like to see the people in the room and people listening to do better? Like, where are some of the things that would, and maybe not just to do better, but what would make your life easier?
I'd say one example recently was on that BMC IPD project, and it was in the ORs. And, there's always different reasons why, you may get pushed by a sub, by a design team, by an owner for prefabrication in an OR, whether it be ceiling systems, wall systems. And there's all different reasons to do them, right? There's time, operational reasons to do them. But, the feedback we always get is, why are we not seeing any cost savings here? The owners are thinking just because of prefab, it's going to cost less money. And that we haven't necessarily got the best feedback from some of our bidders on how to translate that to the owner. That's one example of where we could use more help. As this prefab comes along, is really showing some of the interior precon. It might not be cost savings, it might be X, Y, or Z, but.
And the not providing enough information for you to communicate to the owner?
Right. I mean, if you were doing it, let's say you're building a brand new hospital and there's 20 ORs, well, you're probably going to start saving money. But if you go and you do 3 of them, you might not get that. And it's hard to explain. And then the owners, the subcontractors are just, gouging us on the pricing. And we know that's not true, but we need more help to justify why you're not saving that money.
Yeah, I would say, again, with the understanding that if we're inviting you to bid, we've done a decent amount of vetting of your capacity to meet what we need. So from a technology standpoint or capability standpoint, my critiques aren't necessarily there. They're more sort of procedural, like going back to my earlier point. If we're inviting you to bid and you're not going to bid, like I would love to know that as soon as possible, please, right? Or if you're not sure, at least tell me that you're not sure and you're going to do your best, right? Because it really hurts us. We have already limited our bidder pool based on that pre-qual discussion I had. It really hurts us when we're left with 2 bidders at the end of the day because somebody didn't communicate with us. Along a similar line, if you're, throwing spaghetti on the wall and you don't think you can actually execute the job and you feel like you're just pleasing us by getting us a number, like, again, that does me no favors. I would rather know that you can't execute the job and that you don't submit a bid. Little stuff like if you're not submitting a bid on our bid form, again, for the reasons I mentioned earlier, we want to level the bids as quickly and fastly as possible. We need that level of information. Your letterhead with a lump sum is not really helping me out, right? If you're not asking questions during the life of the bid, that throws flags on our side, right? And some people don't want to ask questions. Maybe it's like ego driven. Well, if I ask too many questions, it makes me look like I don't know what I'm doing. Like, no, we want to know all the questions that you have, all the questions that exist on the job. So we get a little gun shy when we have bidders that are totally silent through the bid process and give us a number at the end of the day. A particular pet peeve, and this doesn't happen a lot, but sometimes you guys can get cute and your number represents something that we're not asking for. It rolls in a deduct alternate that we asked you to price separately. So your number looks artificially low on bid day. Like, we don't want that. Again, we want apples to apples on bid day. And same thing with like exclusions, right? If we're asking you for something, generally there's a reason why we're asking you for that thing. If it's something that's a little bit out of the norm, please ask the question about it and don't just outright exclude it on bid day, right? Because hey, maybe we asked for it for the wrong reason. We would love to know that and have all bidders ensure that they're pricing the right work. Don't just give me a laundry list of exclusions because you priced the job the way you wanted to do it. Like, let's have a conversation before that happens. So
There we go.
I hope I'm not being too critical.
I was going to say Josh went easy on him, but Greg's making up for it. Excellent.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is alternates and equals. There's a basis of design for a reason. We get a lot of pushback from the design teams when we don't give them the basis of design. If it's not the most cost effective, we get it, but tell us. Don't come after the fact and say you used a different material that you've said was an equal, but that you determining it's an equal doesn't mean it's an equal. So that's critical. And just that's the reason. Get your bids to us when we ask them, because there's a reason for that. We want to find those things out, and we can only do that if we have time. So and we need to do that before our proposal goes in, because if we carry a number with the wrong type of brick, and there's an ad, we're owning that. We're not expecting the bids that come in. As I say, we're the only one at risk when we put in a GMP. So that's why we need time. So the time is absolutely critical. And if you can't make the bid date, please let us know more than half an hour beforehand.
Yeah, and I think we definitely appreciate when, even if it's something you're not going to put in your number because it's not in the instructions if there's things you see that we should be carrying, please share that with us. I mean, if you don't, I understand why you don't want to put your number because it drives your number up, but it's important for us to know.
In one thing to add, I know one bone of contention is we call you a lot. We have teams calling you, to get your bids, and it can be very frustrating on both parts. The earliest you answer us to tell us whether you're bidding or not bidding, that's when we can stop the calls. So
That's interesting. So a lot of it seems like it's communication, right? Letting us know early in the process if you're not going to bid.
Right.
When we have a date, it needs to be that date, not can we have a week. And if you do need that week, communicate 2 weeks before that we're not going to make it. Ask questions, right? Work out any kinks and just provide us as much information as possible. Did I capture it all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good job.
In our conversation, there was a lot of talk about value. Where can trade partners, now to be a little more positive, where can they bring value? You can stop doing those things, but where can we bring value as far as you're concerned as a general contractor?
Yeah, I think we hit on a lot of it just throughout the rest of the conversation. I mean, again, being proactive with your questioning, right? Again, you guys are the guys that are going to build the job. We want to know what's in your head through the life cycle of Precon and the bid before we get your bid on bid day, right? We need to be able to adjust the goalposts if the goalposts need to be adjusted for the betterment of the job. So be proactive, and that there's a lot of buckets: proactive schedule, proactive cost, value engineering. There's a lot of buckets to be proactive in, but that's super important. And I think stepping back, we were talking a lot about the transaction, right? We have a job, and now we're in Precon, and we're doing the budgeting or the buyout. Stepping back there. One thing that I think the industry doesn't do a great job on is sort of relationship maintenance, and that's become my job on behalf of Gilbane more nationally than it is in New England. But being proactive about our relationships with trade partners, right? Not relying on the transaction to build a relationship or to fix a relationship. Right? We want to meet with you all earlier. Yesterday I was in town to meet with a contractor who'll go nameless that we haven't done business with in a while. And we had like 12 people in the room, and they had 12 people in the room, and we hadn't seen each other for like 10 years. And so much magic happened, like just in that, couple of hours that we spent together, got to know each other. Changes had happened at their organization that we weren't aware of. Changes had happened at our organization that they weren't aware of. And that was the reason why we weren't doing business together, right? We were just sort of misaligned because we were so used to working transactionally on our relationship and not proactively on a relationship. So, that's on you and us, right? That's a two-way street. Like that involves, you coming to our office or us going to your office. Like we need to know what's going on your side of the fence, just like you need to know what's going on our side of the fence. So I would say don't be afraid to go knocking, just in general. Like, hey, let's have a sit down and not talk about projects. And again, it's not all on you; it's on us as well. But there's a lot of magic that I'm proud to be a part of at Gilbane that's sort of in that area right now. So.
You go next.
So I think, how can you let us help you? I completely agree that this becomes a transactional business. And the more years I'm in the business, the less it becomes transactional. It's more about relationships. It's more about partnerships. And that's a two-way street. If you really need a job, tell me. And I might be able to help you. I might not, but I can support that because you're a partner. This is a multi-project, multi-year relationship that a lot of the times goes beyond construction. So don't be afraid to pick up the phone. We do so much in emails these days, emails and texts, and it's just not the best way to do business. Get on the phone. Let's talk. Let's have meetings. Let's make money together. Let's build projects and all win. And that should be the goal.
Yeah, and I think as Allan had mentioned, as far as one part of your job is making sure that all the partners are getting some of the work and kind of even, but definitely it's not just about the estimating department. Keeping the project teams happy too, especially for us and some of our on-campus work, institutional work. That can be a big deciding factor. If the last two jobs you basically told the PM super to pound sand, it's not going to matter if you have the best number or not. We can't function that way in these hospitals. So I think a lot of one other big thing I think we had recently too is when things were so crazy 3-4 years ago and so busy, a lot of different trade partners were just chasing those big fancy jobs, and then we do a range of big, medium, small, and then wondering why they weren't getting the small jobs now. Well, you wouldn't price those for a long time, so
I completely agree with that. We do a lot of work. We do a lot of estimating. I mean, I think I'm not sure about your departments. We turn over $5 to $6 billion worth of estimates every year. We're inputting a lot of things. We really are loyal to the people who support us. And sometimes those lost causes that you're working on a project that is never going to go forward, but it's with a good client who might have another project. And those relationships and the people that support us, then it's a big deal when we get that help.
absolutely. I mean, some of the biggest. I've seen S&F Concrete bid a $50,000. Some housekeeping pads and.
Yeah, you don't forget it. Yeah. So I'm going to open it up to the people in the room. If you have any specific questions, let's hear them. And then also, what would you have asked if you were sitting where I am? You know, we have some great knowledge here. If there's something I probably missed, I would love to hear it. Go ahead, Danny.
I got a ton of questions, but we can start.
Go ahead.
Greg had mentioned in the pre-qual process backlog a lot. And I know that you guys can know what the subs backlog is with you guys, but you mentioned making assumptions with what they have with other GCs.
Mm-hmm.
Is it truly an assumption, or do you guys talk to each other about, like, do you get references, or do you talk to Lee Kennedy about, hey, we're about to sign up this guy, how much work does he have with you?
Yep, absolutely. So I would say, you know, the first gate, again, is looking at your previous year's financial statements, right? And then we ask ourselves our question, like, how much of that business has been with Gilbane? And we always strive to not be any more than, I won't share the percentage, but a certain percentage of your revenue, right? We don't want to be your sole revenue source, right? We want you to have a healthy backlog with other CMs. So once you're bidding on a job, you've submitted a bid. We're considering Salem Glass as an example. Maybe this is a large package. Maybe it's a bigger package than you've done with us in the past, or any of your current projects with others. We're going to ask you for a current backlog report with other CMs, and we'll ask for a burn on that. Like, when is that job starting and finishing, so we can run our own analysis with how that cash flow is going to correlate with this job's cash flow. So it's sort of like two-pronged approach, but absolutely, yes, we do ask for references as well, but generally we don't need to do that because we've done sort of that capital P pre-qualification before. We're not going to invite you to bid if we need to call on a reference and see how you execute on a job, right? It's more so like, is it true that you've got $50 million worth of backlog with DPR, right, that burns off in the next couple of weeks, or is it really like in the next couple of months?
Yeah, and it's not just our industry peers. We're talking to the insurance companies,
Yep.
the bonding companies. They all know what's going on as well. So there's a lot of knowledge out there. So I think to that point, if we're asking you for backlog, don't miss out any projects. We probably already know about them.
Good point.
They're watching you, Danny. Do you have another one?
You can let someone update you.
All right.
Scope sheets. We love filling out scope sheets. Very in depth. So we're not afraid to mark them up at all. We will cross out things and qualify things. How much does that, you guys obviously look at it, but does that count against us, for us? How does that favor for you?
If you get them to us in advance, we like that. We want that feedback and that comment so we can vet that out, maybe mitigate some of them. You know, it might not just be adding money. You might be taking money off if there's a scope that you've included or not that we don't want you to include. So I don't think it goes against you if you're detailed. We want you to. And when I see a scope sheet that's got a lot of markups, I know you've read it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Usually, we find that there's a lot of extra scope put in things that usually we know is by other subs. And it's just either somebody that just doesn't know exactly where it flows into.
I mean, frankly, you're educating us as well.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's funny. Some of our design peers think that we can give a specification and the subcontractor will price exactly what's in that specification and no more, no less. You know, that's not how this works. You know, there's a scope of work that can be added to or deducted, and the waterproofer does some of the work, the glazer does some of the work. So you know, we need that feedback. So you can't give us enough comments as far as I'm concerned.
Just don't give it at the deadline.
Correct.
Yeah, preferably not. Yeah,
The theme with Allan.
yeah, I would echo that. Yeah, 100%. Don't strike stuff arbitrarily. You know what I mean? Give us some feedback. Like why are you making this modification? But again, you're the experts. We want to know.
So one of the areas I'm seeing a lot of fuss lately is interior finishes. The lead times keep getting longer and longer for the products, and they don't fit into the schedule that is being presented during the bid process. schedule. They quote their schedule. They're locked into lead times, whether it's already running 2 shifts, knowing improved production. They're located in some cornfield in Oklahoma. You know, they have a limited supply of labor. So these requests to improve lead times are unrealistic. And in some instances, you know, the architects have to bid on their selection or design. And it's very hard during the bid process to look at something and say, I want to bid this. I'm not going to set myself up for failure.
What would you like a sub to do in that case where they can't do what you're asking?
Tell us.
Yeah, knowledge is power. And I also, we Kennedy has our own special projects group, and they live that every day. You know, you've got a 2-week bid process. They want you to start the job in the next week, and you've got a 6 weeks to do it. And they expect a sealing system that's got an 8-week lead time. We typically will know that because, you know, we have our specialist group that deals with that. But the feedback is massive because if it's a hard bid, you're not just giving the feedback to us, you're giving it to all the bidders at that point. So it becomes clear.
As bidders, we always try to come in as the low guy. What factors or qualities would make you guys want to consider us if we're not technically the low number?
Yeah, I guess that kind of goes to what I was talking about before. I mean, you know, we at least at Gilbane, you know, we're not trained to say, oh, low number, that's the only conversation we're going to have. That's likely the person we're going to award to. Our first reaction whenever we get bids on bid day is what is the spread and why is there such a spread, right? If there's more than 10%, there's got to be a reason. If there's 20%, that's a huge red flag. There's a big reason. Nobody should be 20% from each other. So our first reaction is, you know, do we have pricing that reflects the job? And we'll always scope review at least the low 2, if not the low 3 or 4 people, depending on what the spreads are, to make sure that, you know, we're addressing the cost that reflects the work, which is our primary goal. So, I mean, of course, you want to be low so that you can be part of the low 3 folks that we talk to, but we don't want you screaming low. We definitely don't want you screaming low. We definitely don't want you making assumptions about or equals or rolling in, you know, deduct alternates in your base bid just so you can get that conversation with us so you have a screaming low number. Like, we don't want those things. We want you competitive at the scope that we're asking for, so.
I'd go back to also the feedback from the, you know, the operations staff, because I think a lot of times some of the people that are coming in low are known for, say, a lot of slips on a job, and it's all going to even out. So keep in touch with your teams and get that feedback.
I would say when it comes, if there's a tie, right? If there's 3 or 4 numbers that are within half a point, we're not necessarily going to go with the low number. That is going to be based on relationships. A lot of it, that's sometimes when, you know, the super having a relationship with one of the subs field guys, that can win the day. So I would say would probably surprise you that it's the low number coming in. I would say is probably the majority of the times not the guy awarded the project once we get into final negotiations. But if you're not so low, if you're out of the mix, or as one of the guys in the office says, if you're off the page break on the bid on the bid tab, you know, so there is a balance there as well.
Do you guys both feel like that 10% number Greg's talking about is a pretty good barometer?
In a well-designed job, that's the challenge. It depends on the trade, but I mean, if you're working on multi-million-dollar trades, 10% is a lot as well. So, I would say typically like if you have 5 or 6 bidders on a project, if it's the low 3 you're looking at, if that's within 10%, sometimes there's outliers.
Yeah.
Both sides that I mean, we've all thrown out bids because they're too low as well. So, but you're looking at that mix. If there's like if it's $1 million job and you have somebody at 600,000 and you have the next 3 between 950 and 1.1,
Yeah,
that tells you where the number is.
Yep.
things, I mean, that, I know Josh, you had mentioned as well, was the relationship with the operations team. How important is it for your operations team or project execs or supers to come to our facilities and see kind of what's behind the curtain? What technology, and walk the BIM department and the fabrication floor, and maybe we could provide a little bit of education as to what goes into our process while also asking what's important to you. Is that something that your
No.
firms would be open to?
We definitely would be, yeah, we like to do that. And then I think when I talk about the relationship too, it's just a matter of responsiveness and, when you call because you're having a problem, that you actually get a response and doesn't just continue to happen. We like to know, our teams like to know that they have someone to call when they have an issue because they're trying to push a deadline and a schedule, and if they don't have a partner, then, not going to want to work with them again.
Exactly, because sometimes, as you said, the pre-qualification package, for example, if you're a contractor trying to get to the next tier of projects, you kind of need that, a little bit of education, a little bit of awareness to your team to say, well, I walk their shop, and maybe it's your senior foreman, your senior project exec that also adds another element into the pre-qual package that allows us to be a team.
I would add to that, it's not just a field team. I think the pre-construction team is maybe even more important so they can ask the right questions. And I would say we get a lot of calls from subs and vendors wanting to come to our office. Just an idea, invite us to your office. Switch it up.
Go ahead, Jim.
Kind of a two-part question. Feedback is great. It's nice to hear if someone says you did a great job, and it's honestly equally as nice to hear when someone tells you that you did a shitty job. Sorry. Do all three of your firms have like a structured grading system or structured feedback at the end of the job? And if you do, have you or do you share it with subcontractors?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a structured feedback or grading system. Like we don't, other than our leveling sheet, like we don't have a scorecard, right? It's a fine balance. We owe you feedback. We want to give you feedback, but we're not going to share numbers, right? Or say necessarily exactly why somebody got picked the job or why you didn't. So it is a delicate balance, right? There's going to be one bride and a whole bunch of bridesmaids, and you're going to have one friend and a whole bunch of enemies in any particular bid, right? But you are owed the feedback. So how many?
I think Jim was meaning at the end of job.
At the end of the job.
I meant from execution.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
You talk about, qualifying the subcontractors, but I'm very curious if you have those structured at the end, the super, the PM.
I see what you're saying. Yep.
And if that gets done and to what extent you share that.
I actually thought, Jim, where you were going is, do we have a double secret probation list for the offenders? Maybe. But so the point to that was, so I actually did that study early in my career. I lobbied all of our PMs and our supers on our projects with the subs, and I asked them to rank 1 to 5 how well the sub did. There was very few 2s, 3s, or 4s. You were either a 1 or a 5, one being bad, 5 being good. So I kind of wrote that off as are you really getting good feedback when people are in the heat of the moment? I think what we strive to do, certainly we do it on our major projects, is have that closeout meeting at the end of the job, and all of the subs are discussed at that point. Not graded, not rated, but what was the good, what was the bads, where did we stand, did we get did they hit schedule? So there's no ranking or rating system, Jim, but it's certainly discussed and factored in to future work.
And to what extent is the feedback given to the sub? I mean, you give me feedback and we look for it, but I can't tell you how many times that I thought it's been a real tough job and it's been a battle. And at the end of the job, the PM goes, I would recommend you guys every day of the week and twice on Sunday.
Yep.
And then the same thing with opposite happens. It's been a smooth job, and at the end, it's like, you guys really weren't that good. It's like, I see every Monday. Where's the feedback?
Yeah, it's a great question. We don't have formal, post-execution feedback, but I would go back to my earlier comment, which is like, if we're not meeting outside of the job regularly, to just do a pulse on our relationship in general and maybe talk about, certainly not the details, but how the last 3 jobs went and what can we do better, like then we're not doing our jobs, right? And it's a two-way street. This is a relationship business. So we should be taking the pulse on our general relationship once a year, at least, right? So it's certainly not formal. And sometimes, to Alan's point, like when jobs are closing out, it's not necessarily the best time and people aren't necessarily in the best headspace to give feedback, right? So taking a step back and having conversations that are sort of outside the job are often, I think, probably the better way to go.
Well, what I've instigated recently is having regular meetings.
Yeah.
So that you can have a non-project discussion with someone. And that's the time to bring up, how's it going on this job? Or, what's going on? what happened, And I think that, to me, is get it out of the project level so you can have a conversation.
Yep.
I definitely see it as a problem. We personally need to do a better job. Walsh Brothers needs to do a better job with that. I mean, there is some of our teams and estimators that give good feedback, but then, a good majority of the time, the feedback's not coming and it should be. So we definitely owe the subcontractors a better feedback.
We also hear about all the bad jobs that the subs have and not too many of the good ones. So it is a two-way street.
Okay. All right. We'll give it a wrap unless somebody else has one. Excellent. All right. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Thanks, Greg, Josh, and Allan. Appreciate you guys spending the time.
Thanks for having us.
All right.
Thank you.